the raw, untamed heart of the West, where the wind carried whispers of forgotten dreams and buried fears, destiny often arrived cloaked in dust and desperation, sealing fates with a single, irreversible breath. This was a story not of choice, but of stark survival, of a woman whose flight from one cage flung her into another, and a man who claimed her not with a question, but with an act of desperate primal resolve. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The world tilted, then dissolved into a kaleidoscope of muted browns and grays. Ilara felt the bite of cinders against her cheek, the scent of coal and sweat clinging to her like a shroud. Her last conscious thought had been the iron clang of a train pulling away, leaving her stranded amidst the bustling chaos of the station, a fragile doll discarded by a careless hand. Now, the roar of the engines had faded, replaced by the hushed whispers of strangers and the distant echo of her own frantic heartbeat. When she finally opened her eyes, the sky above was a bruised purple, bruised like her own spirit, and a pair of worn leather boots stood sentinel at the edge of her blurred vision. A shadow loomed, immense and unyielding, a silhouette against the last gasp of twilight. A rough hand, calloused and strong, lifted her. It was a man, a cowboy from the dust-blown plains, his face etched with the harsh geography of a life lived under an unforgiving sun. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a disquieting blend of curiosity and grim determination. He spoke, his voice gravelly, cutting through the haze of her delirium like a rusty blade. "You ain't got no business collapsing like that. Folks will talk." His words, blunt and devoid of pretense, were a stark contrast to the velvet-gloved deceit she had known. He didn't ask her name, nor did he inquire about the rumpled white lace clinging to her frail frame, the symbol of a union she had fled like a thief in the night. He simply looked at her, his gaze unwavering, as if seeing not a broken woman, but a problem to be solved. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions, a chasm yawning between their disparate worlds. She coughed, a dry, rattling sound that tasted of dust and despair. The station master, a stout man with a disapproving frown etched permanently on his face, hovered nearby, a vulture scenting weakness. "She's got no ticket, mister, no luggage. Just appeared." The cowboy, Silas, as she would later learn, turned his gaze to the official, a silent challenge in his posture. He didn't offer explanations, only solutions. "She's with me," he declared, his voice low, possessing the undeniable weight of authority. The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Ilara's mind, still reeling from exhaustion and the shock of her desperate flight, struggled to comprehend the enormity of his declaration. She was with him? A stranger? The implications settled over her like a suffocating blanket, thick with the irony of trading one unknown fate for another. This was not the freedom she had craved, but a new kind of captivity, born of necessity and circumstance. The thought was a bitter taste on her tongue. The ride out of town was a blur of jostling discomfort and the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels. Ilara sat beside Silas, a silent passenger in a journey she hadn't chosen. The world outside, bathed in the pale glow of a nascent moon, was a landscape of harsh beauty. Mesquite trees twisting like tortured souls, distant hills rising like slumbering giants. Each jolt of the wagon sent a jolt of anxiety through her, a fresh wave of realization crashing against the fragile walls of her composure. She was a runaway, yes, but now she was also claimed. The word resonated in her mind, a discordant bell tolling her surrender. He had purchased a ring from a dusty pawn shop, a band of tarnished silver, and slid it onto her finger with a solemnity that belied the absurdity of the act. No vows exchanged, no blessings given, just the quiet pronouncement before a bemused justice of the peace who seemed to possess an endless supply of questions she could not answer. Her hand, slender and pale, felt suddenly heavy with the weight of that cheap metal, a symbol of a marriage forged in the crucible of desperation, a union without a name or a past. She tried to speak, to protest, but the words caught in her throat, choked by the exhaustion that had been her constant companion for days. What could she say? That she was running from a life that sought to swallow her whole? That the white dress was a shroud, not a celebration? His presence beside her was a quiet enigma. He didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. He simply drove, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his silhouette stark against the deepening night. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was a waiting silence, heavy with unspoken truths and untold stories. She felt a strange sense of unreality, as if she were a character in a play thrust onto a stage without lines or a script. This wasn't how her escape was meant to unfold. She had envisioned open roads, solitary freedom, the wind whipping through her hair, washing away the stench of her past. Instead, she found herself bound, albeit loosely, to a stranger, a man who seemed to embody the very wilderness she sought to embrace. The faint scent of leather and dust clung to him, an earthy smell that was both foreign and strangely reassuring. Her mind, despite its weariness, began to piece together fragments of memory, the oppressive weight of her father's expectations, the chilling indifference of her betrothed, the looming shadow of a fate she could not accept. The memories were shards of glass, piercing her fragile peace, reminding her of the razor's edge she had traversed. She was a leaf in a storm, carried by currents she could neither see nor control, adrift in a sea of unknowns, a reluctant participant in a story that began with a collapsed body and ended with an unasked name. The road ahead was dark, stretching into the vast unknown expanse of the western plains. Silas's ranch emerged from the darkness like a rough-hewn promise, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled against the vast, indifferent expanse of the land. It was not grand, nor was it picturesque. It was a testament to survival, to a life carved out of rock and grit. The small, isolated cabin where he led her smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, a scent that was both alien and strangely comforting after the stale air of trains and the fear-drenched confines of her flight. She stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, her rumpled wedding gown a defiant splash of white against the rustic backdrop, a cruel irony. He gestured to a small, narrow bed in the corner, its mattress thin, covered with a patchwork quilt. "You can rest here," he mumbled, his voice softer than she had expected, devoid of the earlier bluntness. "There's water outside. A basin." He didn't offer comfort or false pleasantries, but a stark reality. She was safe for now, but also inextricably tied to this place and this man. The realization settled deep within her, a cold knot in her stomach. She watched him move, his movements economical and purposeful as he tended to a flickering lamp, then banked the fire in the hearth. His shadow stretched long and distorted against the rough-hewn walls, a phantom presence. He seemed to embody the harsh landscape outside, unyielding, solitary, yet possessing a quiet strength. She wondered about his story, the silent depths that lay beneath his taciturn exterior. Was he a man running from something too, or merely a man of the land, accustomed to making do with what life presented? The silence between them grew, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote, a lonely cry echoing across the plains. She longed for a mirror, for a moment to truly see herself, to reconcile the woman in the tattered white dress with the girl who had once dreamed of gardens and polite society. But there was no mirror, only the reflection in Silas's dark eyes, which seemed to hold the weight of unspoken knowledge. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of unfamiliar tasks and profound isolation. Ilara learned to draw water from the well, to tend a small garden, her hands once delicate and accustomed to embroidery needles, now calloused and stained with earth. Silas, true to his nature, remained a man of few words, his presence a steady, almost silent force in her new world. He worked the land, rode the ranges, and occasionally, during the long, silent evenings, he would mend tack or clean his rifle, his movements deliberate, his thoughts unreadable. The townsfolk, a handful of weathered faces who occasionally visited the ranch, offered polite but wary nods, their eyes lingering on her, on the simple silver band that marked her as Silas's wife. She felt the weight of their judgment, the unspoken questions about her past, her sudden appearance, the raw, unpolished circumstances of her union. They were a Greek chorus of disapproval, their whispers like venomous insects buzzing around her ears. One afternoon, while tending to the chickens, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome like a splinter under the skin. The sterile white walls of her childhood home, the suffocating scent of lilies, her father's voice cold and unyielding, dictating her future. "You will marry him, Ilara. There is no other path." The words, once a decree, now felt like a curse, a chain she had shattered with her desperate flight. The image of the man she was meant to marry, a man older than her father, his eyes devoid of warmth, his hands, she knew, would be cold and grasping, solidified into a monstrous specter in her mind. He was a symbol of everything she had defied, a chilling reminder of the societal expectations that sought to crush individual spirit. Her breath hitched. The chickens scattered, startled by her sudden gasp. She knelt, burying her face in her hands, the rough earth a cold comfort against her skin. The past, she realized with a shudder, was not merely a memory. It was a hungry beast, constantly snapping at her heels, its shadow long and inescapable, even in the vast emptiness of the plains. Silas found her there later, her face streaked with dirt and unshed tears. He did not ask, did not offer platitudes. He simply knelt beside her, a silent, grounded presence. His unspoken understanding was more potent than any words could have been, a small flicker of warmth in the encroaching darkness. This quiet acceptance, this lack of judgment, was a stark contrast to the relentless scrutiny she had always known. The unspoken agreement that defined their marriage was a fragile thing, built on unspoken needs and silent understanding. Ilara, haunted by the specter of her past, saw Silas as a temporary reprieve, a shield against the forces that hunted her. Silas, for his part, offered no grand pronouncements of love or commitment, but his actions spoke volumes. He provided, he protected, he allowed her the space to breathe in a world that had sought to suffocate her. Their days were a dance of unspoken routines, a delicate balance of shared chores and private thoughts. The cabin, once a symbol of her sudden captivity, began to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, albeit one purchased with the currency of an unconventional union. Still, the mystery of Silas remained, a question mark etched onto the landscape of her new life. What had prompted his sudden, decisive action at the train station? Was it pity? A pragmatic need for a wife in this desolate land? Or something else entirely? Something hidden beneath the stoic facade? She searched his eyes for answers, but they remained as deep and unreadable as the night sky. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the wind howling like a banshee, Silas sat by the fire, mending a saddle. His hands, though rough, moved with a surprising dexterity. Ilara, huddled in a blanket, watched him. The flickering lamplight cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw, the deep-set eyes that held a hint of melancholic introspection. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper against the storm's fury. The single word hung in the air, heavy with all the unspoken questions about their strange bond. He paused, his needle suspended in midair. His gaze met hers, steady and intense. "You looked like a bird with a broken wing," he said, his voice low, "and the vultures were circling." The simplicity of his answer was disarming, yet it offered little in the way of true understanding. Was that all it was? A momentary impulse of compassion? Or was there a deeper current beneath his words, a recognition of a shared vulnerability? The quiet declaration hung in the air, a truth that felt both insufficient and profoundly significant. His compassion, if that's what it was a strange, unexpected grace in her life. It offered a stark contrast to the cold calculation of her father's world, where every interaction was a transaction, every relationship a means to an end. This man, Silas, had simply acted, without asking for anything in return, not even her name. The irony of her situation, of finding a semblance of safety in the most unlikeliest of unions, was not lost on her. She was a woman without a past, married to a man without a story she understood. They were two adrift vessels, bound by an invisible tether, navigating the treacherous waters of the unknown. Her gaze drifted to the tarnished silver ring on her finger. It was a visible reminder of her predicament, a tangible mark of her new, unspoken contract. The marriage, while unconventional, offered a strange kind of liberation from the oppressive past, even as it shackled her to a new, ambiguous present. It was a choice forced upon her, yet one that, paradoxically, had given her the chance to breathe, to exist outside the suffocating confines of her former life. The world outside the ranch was a constant, simmering threat. News traveled slowly in these remote parts, carried by weary travelers and whispered across dusty saloon counters. Ilara knew her father, a man of formidable influence and unyielding pride, would not simply let her disappearance stand. He would have dispatched men, relentless and cunning, to track her down, to reclaim his property, to erase the stain she had brought upon his name. The thought was a cold, creeping dread that tightened its grip on her heart with each passing day. She saw shadows in the distance, heard phantom horse hooves on the wind. Her sleep was fractured by nightmares of pursuit, of being dragged back to a life she abhorred, to a union that would extinguish her spirit. She felt Silas's silent vigilance. He seemed to sense her unspoken fear, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from the rifle propped against the cabin wall. One sweltering afternoon, a rider approached, kicking up a plume of dust that stained the already hazy sky. He was not a local, his clothes too fine, his demeanor too polished for the rugged land. His eyes, when they met hers, held a chilling recognition, a predatory gleam that made her blood run cold. It was one of her father's men, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Her breath caught in her throat. The past, a phantom no longer, had finally materialized, a dark stain on the sun-baked earth. She scrambled towards the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of impending doom. Silas, who had been working at the corrals, straightened, his movements sudden and sharp. He had seen him too. The air crackled with a silent tension, a predatory stillness before the storm. The man dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his shadow long and menacing. "Ilara," he drawled, his voice a silken menace. "Your father sends his regards. He desires your swift return." The words were an icy grip around her soul, a cruel reminder of the cage she had fled. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and the approaching shadow. His posture was deceptively relaxed, but his eyes, sharp and unwavering, held a dangerous glint. "She's my wife," he stated, his voice low, a rumble of distant thunder. The man from her past, a sleek, venomous snake named Hawthorne, merely smirked. "A marriage of convenience, I presume, forged in haste and desperation." His gaze flicked to Ilara, laced with thinly veiled contempt. "Your father is a powerful man, Ilara. He is not accustomed to having his will defied. This arrangement will not stand." The air grew thick with unspoken threats, the tension palpable, stretching taut like a bowstring about to snap. Ilara's mind raced, a torrent of desperate memories, the suffocating opulence of her childhood home, the cold, calculating eyes of her father, the forced smiles of a society that valued appearances over truth. She saw the flash of a dark, moonless night, the rough hands that had seized her, the chilling words whispered in the dark. "You will comply, or you will regret it." This was the true horror she had fled, not just an arranged marriage, but a deeper, more sinister control, a complete erasure of her autonomy. A deep scar, a jagged testament to a violent past, suddenly emerged on her forearm, a mark she usually kept hidden. It was a reminder of a moment she had tried to bury, a struggle, a desperate attempt to break free from her father's suffocating grip, a memory of a hidden room, a desperate, silent plea for help that had gone unanswered. Her father's fury had been a physical force, leaving its indelible mark. This scar was a symbol of her resistance, of her will to survive, even when pushed to the brink. Silas's eyes, ever observant, caught the glimpse of the scar, and a flicker of something new, not just comprehension but a deeper, more profound understanding, crossed his face. Hawthorne's gaze followed Silas's, his sneer widening as he recognized the unspoken truth behind the gesture. "A rebellious spirit, as always, Ilara. Your father has grown tired of it. He wants you back by any means necessary." The implied violence in his words hung heavy in the air. Ilara knew, with chilling certainty, that "by any means necessary" included the complete obliteration of her fragile new life, and perhaps her very existence. Silas shifted, almost imperceptibly, his stance becoming subtly more defensive. His hand, as if by instinct, moved towards the holstered pistol at his hip. The confrontation was no longer just about her freedom. It was about survival, about the very foundation of this strange, unasked-for marriage. The confrontation escalated into a brutal ballet of dust and desperation. Hawthorne, agile and cruel, lunged, his movements precise and deadly. Silas, a man of the earth, met him with raw, unpolished strength. The sounds of fists meeting flesh, of labored breathing, filled the air, punctuated by the metallic scrape of a drawn blade. Ilara watched, frozen by a primal fear, as her fragile sanctuary became a battleground. She saw the familiar malevolence in Hawthorne's eyes, the same cold indifference that had haunted her from her earliest memories. This was the embodiment of her past, reaching out to reclaim her, to pull her back into the abyss she had so desperately clawed her way out of. She remembered the stifling silence of her father's mansion, the watchful eyes of his guards, the unspoken threats that had always hung in the air like a suffocating shroud. It was a life of opulent imprisonment, a gilded cage designed to break her spirit. This fight was not just Silas's, it was hers too, a desperate struggle against the chains of her own lineage. A sharp cry tore through the air as Silas took a blow, staggering back, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. For a horrifying moment, Ilara feared the worst, that her brief respite, her newfound, if unconventional safety, was about to be snatched away. But then, Silas roared, a guttural sound born of fury and something akin to a protective instinct. He moved with a speed that belied his quiet nature, a force of nature unleashed. The fight became a desperate, brutal dance, a clash of two starkly different worlds, the calculating cruelty of society's elite versus the raw, unvarnished strength of the wild. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, Silas brought Hawthorne down, pinning him to the dry earth, his eyes burning with an intense, unreadable emotion, bored into the defeated man. "You tell your master," Silas rasped, his voice low and dangerous. "She ain't going anywhere. She's mine." The words, blunt and possessive, resonated with a new meaning, not just of ownership, but of protection, of a fierce, unyielding claim. The aftermath of the fight left the air thick with tension and the lingering scent of dust and fear. Hawthorne, battered and broken, was given a stark choice: leave and never return, or face the consequences. He chose the former, limping away into the fading light, a living testament to Silas's grim resolve. The quiet of the ranch settled once more, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one charged with the weight of what had transpired. Ilara stood, trembling, her eyes fixed on Silas. His chest heaved, his knuckles bruised, but his gaze, when it met hers, was clear and steady. The raw vulnerability of the moment stripped away all pretense, all ambiguity. He had fought for her, not out of obligation, but with a fierce, protective instinct that transcended their unasked-for marriage. It was then, standing amidst the dust and the quiet triumph, that the true weight of her past finally descended upon her. The escape, the forced marriage, the fight. It had all been a desperate, clawing struggle for the right to simply exist on her own terms. She walked towards him, slowly, deliberately, the silent acknowledgement of a profound shift between them. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse, thick with unshed tears and a lifetime of unspoken burdens. "My name is Ilara," she whispered. The first time she had offered it freely, a small, profound act of surrender and trust. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Silas," he responded, his voice soft, the formal introduction a quiet echo of their unconventional vows. In that moment, the cheap silver ring on her finger felt less like a mark of captivity and more like a fragile, nascent promise. It was the beginning of a different kind of bond, forged not in desperation, but in the crucible of shared danger and unexpected loyalty. The path ahead was still uncertain, riddled with echoes of her past and the stark realities of this harsh land. But for the first time in a very long time, Ilara felt a fragile flicker of hope, a warmth blossoming in the desolate landscape of her heart. The world, though still full of its inherent darkness, seemed to offer a sliver of light, a chance for a future she could perhaps truly call her own. The days that followed the confrontation brought a quiet shift, an unspoken understanding settling between Ilara and Silas. The air, once thick with their individual mysteries, now carried a faint echo of shared experience, a subtle resonance. Ilara began to shed the invisible shroud of fear that had clung to her. She watched Silas, truly watched him, seeing beyond the taciturn exterior to the deep currents of a man shaped by the land and its unforgiving demands. She saw the quiet strength in his hands as he mended fences, the unwavering focus in his eyes as he broke a wild Mustang. He was a man of action, of quiet dedication, a stark contrast to the hollow promises and empty words of her past. She started to speak, not just about practical matters, but of memories, fragments of her life before the flight, testing the waters of his understanding. She spoke of the stifling expectations, the coldness of her father's ambition, the stifled dreams that had withered in the opulent prison of her youth. He listened silently, his gaze steady, offering no judgment, only a grounded presence that allowed her words to simply exist, to be heard, without the weight of scrutiny or expectation. The small cabin, once a place of reluctant refuge, began to feel like a home. Slowly, tentatively, the rough-hewn walls seemed to soften, the scent of wood smoke comforting. Ilara, with her newfound peace, began to infuse the space with her own quiet touches. A wild flower in a salvaged bottle, a carefully mended patch on a worn blanket. These small acts of domesticity were not a surrender to convention, but an reclaiming of agency, a quiet defiance against the forces that had sought to control her very existence. She learned to ride, finding a fierce, exhilarating freedom in the rhythm of the horse's gait beneath her, the wind whipping through her hair, washing away the last lingering vestiges of the oppressive past. The plains, once a terrifying symbol of her isolation, now stretched out before her, vast and welcoming, a testament to endless possibility. The scars of her past remained, etched on her body and soul, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were fading maps of a journey survived, a testament to her enduring spirit. The marriage, born of desperation, had become something else entirely, something forged in the crucible of necessity and tempered by unexpected loyalty. The resolution was not a neat tied bow, but an unfolding landscape, a promise of a future that was not entirely certain, but undeniably her own. The threat from her father had receded, becoming a distant rumble, a fading echo on the horizon. He might never truly stop searching, but the vastness of the land and Silas's unwavering presence offered a formidable shield. Ilara had found a new kind of freedom, not in solitude, but in a partnership born of shared struggle. The irony was palpable. She had run from a forced marriage only to find a truer bond in one that had initially seemed equally imposed. Silas, the quiet cowboy who had married her without asking her name, had become the unexpected anchor in her storm-tossed life, a silent guardian in the vast, indifferent wilderness. Their bond was not one of passionate declarations, but of quiet understanding, of shared burdens and unspoken trust, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the crucible of adversity. The sun set, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple, a dramatic canvas that mirrored the tumultuous journey of Ilara's heart. She stood beside Silas, watching the day surrender to the night, the vastness of the plains stretching out before them, silent and immense. The future remained unwritten, a blank page waiting for their hands to fill it. There would be challenges, no doubt, the relentless demands of the land, the lingering shadows of her past. But for the first time, Ilara faced it with a quiet strength, born not of defiance, but of acceptance. She was not a runaway bride anymore. She was a woman, forged in the fires of survival, standing on the precipice of a new beginning, ready to face whatever lay ahead, not alone, but with the man who had seen her collapse and without a single question had claimed her as his own. Their story, etched into the rugged landscape of the West, was a testament to the unexpected paths destiny often chooses, to the profound connections found in the most unlikely of places, and to the enduring hope that flickers even in the darkest of times, leading one towards an unforeseen yet deeply resonant resolution. The quiet expanse of the land stretched out before them, an open invitation to a life earned, not given.